The subject of this essay will be, is Islam hostile to the rights of women? Or put more simply, is Islam a religion of gender inequality? In order to answer this question, I will explore the gender roles promulgated by the religion of Islam, focusing specifically on women. The term Islam is broad, so for the sake of brevity, only traditional Orthodox Sunni Islam will be discussed, particularly the Quran, the Hadith literature, and Sunni Islamic jurisprudence. Ahmet Riza, a leading figure in the Young Turk movement that swept the Ottoman Empire towards the end of the 19th century, stated the following in a letter to his sister. Quote, "Were I a woman, I would embrace atheism and never become a Muslim. Imagine a religion that imposes laws, always beneficial to men, but hazardous to women, such as permitting my husband to have 3 additional wives, and as many concubines as he wishes, houris awaiting him in heaven, while I cover my head and face as a miller's horse. Beside these, I would not be allowed to divorce a husband who prevented me from having any kind of fun, but would be required to submit to his beatings. Keep this religion far away from me." Unquote. Although somewhat inflammatory, Riza's criticisms are in fact valid, and touch upon a number of the controversial aspects of Islam regarding women. As the Young Turk correctly noted, Islam condones polygyny and concubines, both corporal and heavenly, demands the covering and obscuring of women, advantages males over females in the accessibility of divorces, and allows men to resort to physical force in order to discipline their wives. In light of these facts, Riza's quote serves as a topical introduction to the subject at hand. It won't, however, be enough to point out, for example, that the Quran considers men to be inherently superior to women, or that the Prophet Muhammad expounded the belief that women constitute the majority of hell's residents, due to the fact that they are ungrateful towards their husbands and are religiously and mentally deficient. Along with the Quran and the Hadith literature, we must also, and perhaps more importantly, examine Islamic jurisprudence, and how the laws and customs of the aforementioned holy scriptures are interpreted and implemented. In order to do this, we must consult the positions and stances of the official Sunni schools of Islamic jurisprudence, the madhabs. Sunni Islam contains 4 of these schools: the Hanafi madhab, generally considered to be the most popular and liberal school, the Maliki madhab, the Shafi madhab, and the Hanbali madhab, generally considered to be the most hardline and conservative of the 4 schools. It may be worth noting that the Hanbali school is the official madhab of Saudi Arabia. Our examination of Islam's treatment of men and women will begin, as did Riza's scathing criticisms, with polygyny. According to the Quran, men are permitted to marry as many as 4 wives, a provision that is not given to women. This precedent is universally accepted in Islam, and the scholarly consensus, ijma, of the collective clerical authority of Islam, the ulama, throughout the ages has been that polygyny is acceptable. Polyandry, on the other hand, is absolutely forbidden. Further restrictions are placed upon whom a woman may marry. Unlike Muslim men, who may marry Christian and Jewish women, according to the Quran, Muslim women are denied this right in Islamic jurisprudence and are restricted to marriage with Muslim males. As well as marrying 4 wives, Muslim men are also allowed, according to the Quran and the Hadith literature, to possess and have sex with female slaves, i.e. concubines, a custom that traditional Islamic law sanctioned. Muslim women, however, were universally barred from having sex with male slaves or owning male concubines. A similar arrangement to the Islamic system of marriage and concubinage can be found in heaven, if the Quran and the Hadith literature are to be trusted, where men will cavort in bliss not only with their wives, but with sensual, divine concubines known as houris. According to the renowned 16th century Islamic scholar Jalal el-Din as-Suyuti, quote, "Each time we sleep with a houri, we find her virgin. Besides, the penis of the elected never softens. The erection is eternal. The sensation that you feel each time you make love is utterly delicious and out of this world, and were you to experience it in this world, you would faint. Each chosen will marry 70 houris, besides the women he married on earth, and all will have appetizing vaginas." Unquote. This view is typical of the traditional conception of heaven as understood by the classical scholars of Islam, and seems to paint a rather male-centric vision of the afterlife. Back on earth, wives are expected to obey their husbands and submit to their needs and demands. According to one tradition, women who refuse to sleep with their husbands will be cursed by angels till morning. This kind of thinking is reflected in traditional Islamic jurisprudence, according to Dr. Kesha Ali. Quote, "Despite the scholars' acknowledgement of the importance of female satisfaction in the sexual act, the overwhelming weight of the Muslim legal and exegetical tradition is on women's obligations to make themselves sexually available to their husbands, rather than the reverse." Unquote. Ali further goes on to explain that, quote, "Most jurists viewed the husband's support of his wife as an exchange for her sexual availability to him, and agreed that her sexual refusal constituted grounds for suspension of her support," unquote, and further goes on to point out that, quote, "Sex is, by and large, a male right and female duty, according to the fiqh texts," unquote. Even more alarming, however, is the fact that the Hanafi madhab traditionally allows men to rape their wives if the latter refuse the former's sexual advances. Omid Safi explains, quote, "For the Hanafis, a wife's sexual refusal was not ground for loss of maintenance. However, this was because she was still considered available to her husband. He was entitled to force her to have intercourse," unquote. The other madhabs are less aggressive in this respect, as Dr. Kesha Ali explained previously. In the instance of a wife denying her husband sex, they instruct the former to withdraw his financial and material support from the latter until she complies with his desires. When it comes to domestic matters in general, the Quran instructs women to obey their husbands, and in the event that a wife refuses to submit to her husband, the Quran and the Hadith literature suggest, after admonishments and abstinence, the use of physical force as a form of discipline. The majority of traditional Islamic scholarship permitted a husband to resort to physical force to discipline rebellious wives, although there is disagreement over how this act is to be carried out. In general, women are traditionally consigned to the role of domestic affairs, and it is commanded in the Quran that the wives of the Prophet Muhammad, whose example Muslim women are supposed to emulate, should stay confined in their homes. The Hadith literature further elaborates that it is a woman's role to take care of the household, a stipulation that is reflected in Islamic jurisprudence. The Hanafi, Maliki and Shafi madhabs conclude that a woman requires the permission of her husband to leave the house. The Hanbalis are more lenient in this respect, allowing the possibility of free mobility for women provided that such a privilege is specified in the marriage contract. John Esposito summarizes the general arrangement as follows, quote, "The wife's main obligation involves maintaining a home, caring for her children, and obeying her husband. He is entitled to exercise his marital authority by restraining his wife's movements and preventing her from showing herself in public." Unquote. Women are further required to travel abroad with a chaperone, according to all of the madhabs, based upon traditions recorded in the Hadith literature, which state that a woman must travel with a chaperone on any journey of a length exceeding 3 days, which, given the modes of transport available during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, was presumably a very limited distance. When it comes to public attire, Islam demands an extremely strict dress code. The Quran mandates modest clothing for both men and women, but specifies extra measures for the latter, demanding that they wear headscarves, cover their breasts, and refrain from revealing themselves in public. The Hadith literature further elaborates on this, and provides anecdotes pertaining to the application of the Quran's commandments, directives that Islamic jurisprudence puts into practice. All of the madhabs agree that a woman should be veiled from head to toe in public, although there is nuance over whether or not her face and hands have to be obscured also. Imam Abu Hanifa, the founder of the Hanafi madhab, believed that a woman had to cover all but her face, hands and feet. Imam Malik and Imam al-Shafi, the founders of the Maliki and Shafi madhabs respectively, both agreed that women have to cover all but the hands and face. Imam Hanbal, the progenitor of the fourth school of Islamic jurisprudence, restricted women to merely showing their face alone. Today, the Hanafi and Maliki madhabs allow women to show their face in public, whilst the Shafi and Hanbali madhabs require full veiling. Men, by stark contrast, are only required to keep their limbs covered to varying degrees. When it comes to the issue of divorce, the Hanafis, Shafis, and Hanbalis hold that even if a husband neglects his wife and fails to support her, she is not entitled to a divorce unless her husband consents. The Malikis are kinder in this respect, allowing women the option of divorce in severe cases of such behaviour. Under the Hanafi madhab, it is virtually impossible for a woman to obtain a divorce, the only circumstances being the inability of a man to consummate the marriage or his absence for many years, whilst the Malikis allow for divorce in cases of marital mistreatment, and the Shafi and Hanbali schools fall somewhere in between. Perhaps one of the most controversial aspects of Islam regarding women relates to the issue of witnesses. According to the Quran, the testimony of a woman is worth half that of a man in matters of finance, due to the mental limitations of the former. The Hadith literature confirms this belief and elaborates on how the Prophet Muhammad believed that the unreliability of a female testimony was due to the inherent mental deficiency of women. This sentiment is echoed in all of the madhabs, and it is generally agreed in most circumstances, ranging from marriage and finance to court witnessing, etc., that the testimony and evidence of a woman is either inferior to that of a man or not accepted at all. It isn't only women who face limitations, however. In traditional Sunni Islam, men are consigned to the role of breadwinners. In all of the madhabs, it is universally agreed that it is the duty and the requirement of a husband to provide food, clothing, and accommodation to his wives and children, regardless of whether he is rich or poor. The failure or inability to provide these basic necessities can be grounds for a divorce in some circumstances. The roles of men and women in Islam are perhaps best expressed by Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Ghazali, oft considered the greatest Islamic scholar of all time, courtesy of Tamim Ansari. Quote, Ghazali devotes 1/4 of his oeuvre, the revival of the religious sciences, to a discourse on marriage, family life, and the proper etiquette for the sexes. Here he says that a woman should remain in the inner sanctum of her house and tend to her spinning. She should not enter and exit excessively. She should speak infrequently with her neighbours and visit them only when the situation requires it. She should safeguard her husband in his absence and in his presence. She should seek his pleasure in all affairs. She should not leave his house without his permission. If she goes out with his permission, she should conceal herself in worn-out clothes. She should be ready at all times for her husband to enjoy her whenever he wishes. Ghazali also discusses men's obligations to their wives, but add up all his remarks and you can see that he's envisioning a social world divided strictly into the private one and the public realm, reserved exclusively for men." Unquote. Throughout this essay we have explored the Quran, the Hadith literature, and Sunni Islamic jurisprudence, examining a number of different subjects. We have seen that according to traditional Sunni Islam, polygyny is embraced, whilst polyandry is strictly forbidden. Muslim men may marry Christians and Jews, whilst Muslim women may only marry within the faith. Muslim men may possess concubines, on earth and in heaven, whilst Muslim women may not. Muslim women who refuse their husbands' sexual advances are cursed by preternatural forces, and may either be raped or starved of their support as a result. Muslim women must obey their husbands in general, and if the former become rebellious, the latter have the option of resorting to physical force to discipline them. Muslim women must obscure themselves in public, whilst men are given greater freedom of attire. A Muslim woman needs the permission of her husband to obtain a divorce in most circumstances. The testimony of a Muslim woman is less than that of a Muslim man, as the former are mentally deficient, according to traditional Sunni Islam. In light of these facts, it would seem correct to assume that the religion of Islam is indeed hostile to the rights of women, favouring the rights of males at the expense of females. Rather than saying that Islam is sexist per se, however, it would perhaps be more accurate to say that traditional Sunni Islam enforces a strict system of gender roles and stereotypes that greatly advantages men over women. In a sense, Islam is hostile to the rights of both genders, male and female alike.